Well, hello everyone. It is good to be with you again. We will give it a couple minutes while everyone is joining in here before we get started. I'm going to attach a link to the comment section like I do every week for you while we wait, and then we'll get started here in just a couple minutes. I hope everyone's day is going okay so far today. It was a pretty nice morning, actually. I think it's going to rain, though, this afternoon, which is kind of a bummer. All right. There we go. I'm going to pin that. All right, we'll give it just another minute or two to allow some people to join in, and then we will get started with what we're going to do today. Got my coffee ready for the rainy afternoon here. Right. Well, we will go ahead and get started, and if anybody jumps in late, that's great. And as always, these videos will be available to watch at a later time. So if you want to go back and catch something that maybe you missed, you can do that. So like I already said, it's great to be with you guys again. I'm really enjoying going through this book again. I read through it, it's probably 3 or 4 years ago now, but it's really great recalling some of these methods of prayer. I hope that, over the last week, you were able to spend some time engaging the creative parts of yourself as you were in prayer. I know when I do this, it is a very reflective time for me to focus on making something that wasn't there before, something, that I can take pride in. And as I do it, I am able to simply be with God and be reminded of that friendship that is always present. I know it's there, but sometimes when I'm not mindful of it, I forget that God's friendship is always present with me. Sometimes I have difficulty focusing during prayer, and I'm sure there are many of you that have that same struggle. And so this outlet of creative prayer allows me to put my attention on something so that my mind doesn't just simply wander off. And I decided, this last week to do something that was a little bit more familiar to me. I talked about cooking last week and how that's a really engaging thing for me. And I know right now with everything going on, it's kind of hard to engage in new things. So it was really great. I haven't actually been cooking as much over the last month or so, which doesn't make sense because I'm home all the time, so I should have plenty of time to do that. But I will admit to you that I have been kind of lazy and ordering takeout quite a bit and, doing frozen pizzas and stuff like that. So this past week, I was determined to cook a few meals, and I was reminded, I guess, of the enjoyment that can come from creating. And it was great to eat, real food that is home cooked. So just like in the weeks past, I have attached the Google Doc. It's the same one every week. I just add to it. It's the pinned comment in the comment section of this video, where you will be able to find all the resources you need to participate in this prayer journey with us. And I'm leaving the past weeks on there so that if you want to go back and revisit them, at another time you can do that. So each week, I'll be adding to that document in a new way to engage God through prayer. So if you missed any of our time together in the past couple weeks, we are adventuring through this book called A Guidebook to Prayer by Mary Kate Morse. And Dr. Morse was one of my seminary professors and was very instrumental in helping me to develop a rich prayer life. And so the goal of this study is for everyone who chooses to engage to find some new and exciting ways to nurture your relationship with God through prayer. Now, as I mentioned last week, Mary Kate, the author of this book, is actually going to be joining us on this live feed next Thursday. So if you've been following along, you're definitely not going to want to miss next Thursday. It's going to be really cool. I'm going to ask her several questions about the book and just about maybe her writing process. And we're going to be jumping into chapter 5 next week, actually, because chapter 4 we kind of covered in our intro week, but into chapter 5. And I'm really looking forward to asking her some questions as it relates to that topic. So it's going to be really exciting. Now, as I've said all along, there are many different ways to pray. And that's why we're doing this, because there are many different ways for us to engage God through prayer. None are better than any other. They're just different. And we read a quote in the beginning of this book that is summarized like this, that God is like a city and prayer is like avenues into the city. Some may be freeways and roads, some may be hiking and biking trails, but no matter what route you take, you are drawing closer to God. You are drawing closer and closer into the city. So today, we're jumping into chapter 3 of the book, which centers on work prayer. Now, work prayer is such an important concept that helps us to recenter ourselves during the ordinary minutia of everyday life. We were created to work, and when it's done with the right attitude and the right purpose, it makes this world better for everyone in it. So Mary Kate, she begins this chapter by reminding us that humanity is bound together in our work. We get up each day, we dress, we hopefully eat breakfast, and we head out to our places of work or study, or begin our work in our homes. We are all one in this daily ritual of survival and meaning, and God is reflected in that work. The creation narrative refers to God as working. God's occupation was to create a good and loving world. In Genesis 2:2, it says, "And on the seventh day, God finished the work that he had done, and he rested on the seventh day from all the work he had done." We are made in God's image. We are people who thrive on community, people who create, and now people who make a contribution. We are people who work. Excuse me. So obviously, life has changed, and many of us either aren't working right now or are working from home. But that doesn't mean that we have to stop working altogether. We can still create and cultivate good things in this world. We can do things like check in on people. We can help others to the best of our abilities. We can still work for our families and serve our homes. And we can still take care of ourselves, which can be a lot of work, speaking from personal experience. But one of the most important concepts to grasp is that work is not a punishment. Work is a blessing. Work was created before the fall. So work is a blessing. It's not a punishment. It's a contribution that we make on behalf of others. It's how we contribute to this world. Mary Kate expounds on this concept. God intended us to work. Work isn't the result of the fall. Work is part of the fabric of creation. The betrayal of work is the consequence of the fall. The fact that work environments are sometimes oppressive, bosses and coworkers sometimes untrustworthy, institutions sometimes greedy, and workers sometimes undervalued and underpaid is the consequence of sin. God created work and can redeem it in our lives. So work isn't what is sinful. Work isn't the enemy. It is when work and workers are mistreated that it becomes that. It is no secret that there are many unjust work systems out there that take advantage of people, and that is not good. I don't think that aligns with God's creation. And we need to be mindful of these situations when they happen and to pray for justice and reconciliation within these broken systems. And maybe for some of you, your work is or will be fighting against these types of oppression. Mary Kate, she goes on to explain how prayer can be incorporated in our work. She says work is another way in which we experience the presence of God. When we bring prayer into our work, we uncover other possibilities for being shaped and influenced by God. Work occupies a large portion of our waking lives, even more so today. An average middle-income couple works 7 weeks longer each year than they did just 10 years ago. And that statistic blew my mind. This book, I think, was written around 2013. So it's probably even more so now. With work taking more, she continues on, with work taking more energy and focus from people's lives, and with a stressed economy, very stressed right now, work becomes a survival environment that begs for the influencing presence of God. By bringing prayer into our work environments, whether we are students, homemakers, store clerks, bank presidents, gallery owners, farmers or manufacturers, or even retirees, God is walking and talking with us at work. God is part of our ordinary lives, not just when we are having devotional time. God is not just in the sacred spaces of worship, confession, and holiness, but in the secular spaces of sweat, energy, and productivity. Whatever we are doing, it can be bathed in prayer. So I think it is an easy temptation to compartmentalize our lives. You know, we have our time for work, we have our time for rest, we have our time for family, we have our time for recreation, we have our time for ourselves, and we have time for God. You know, and I'm sure there's other things we have time for. But when we do this, we neglect how far-reaching the presence of God is and how the Spirit can shape us no matter where we are, even including work. So maybe for some of us, it is difficult to recognize this because our work maybe leads us into participating in those unjust systems. And if that's the case, maybe that's why we build up these barriers of compartmentalization so that we can kind of ignore those things that we're participating in. And I don't say this with a tone of condemnation, but hopefully with a tone that will bring reflection to our lives as we examine the ways in which we participate in work. Mary Kate suggests that our perception of God's availability and capability comes through finding ways to pay attention to God in our work environments. We don't intend to put God in our back pockets, but we inadvertently do when we become overly focused on work. The result is that we compartmentalize our spiritual lives. If we do think about bringing God to work, it's usually when we think, we should witness about God to someone. We do need to witness, yet the greatest witness to God is a person who is reflecting God's character and love. Therefore, praying in our workplaces connects us to God and helps us pay attention. Paying attention also enlarges God's role in our lives. God is more than a miracle worker who we can call on when the going gets tough. God designed us for significance, and the strange spiritual reality is that significance usually comes with attentiveness to God in the ordinary, rather than the execution of something extraordinary. So attentiveness to others, attentiveness to our surroundings, attentiveness to the presence of God is one of the best ways that we can engage our work through prayer. Prayer is not limited to sitting down with our Bibles in our favorite chair for 30 minutes a day, but prayer is a mindset of being attentive all the time. When Paul talks about praying without ceasing, I kind of think that's what he's getting at there, is always having a prayerful mindset that is attentive to our surroundings, to recognize things, to see things as God sees them. And when we start to do that, it begins to break down those barriers of compartmentalization and allows us to see the world as God sees it. In the final quote of this chapter, Mary Kate actually quotes someone else. His name is Dr. Simon Chan, who is a theologian in Singapore. And he says this: today's world is increasingly defined by the market economy. Thus, work has become one of the most significant activities people pursue. In prayer, work loses its self-serving character and aims at serving God. When we pray, we no longer see work solely in terms of profit and productivity. We begin to see it in terms of its ultimate intention in creation, to further the blessings of creation and to counter the effects of wickedness. This view of work can only be achieved through prayer, which opens our vision to the interconnectedness of all things to God. So this week, as you work, whatever that may look like for you now, be mindful of the presence of God around you. Be attentive to others in your surroundings. Our work is not just about money and profits and deadlines, but it's about co-creating with God a better and more just world. And so the steps for this are very simple. And again, they're on that, if you follow that link that's on the pinned comment to that Google Doc, you just have to scroll down to this week. All the steps are lined out there. You can use that to reference anytime during the week. But here they are. So first, you need to decide what your work environment is right now, because it might look a lot different than what we're used to. For some, this may be very simple because you're still going to work. But others, you might have to think outside the box a little bit. Next, try spending 3 days if you can. But even if you can only do it once, still try it. But 3 days next week, praying for that work environment. If you can, spend 5 to 10 minutes at the beginning of the day or a few minutes 2 to 3 times a day praying blessings, reminder prayers, and specific petitions for the work, your fellow workers, and for yourself as a worker. So be praying for, the work itself, but for those around you and for yourself. Number 3, remain as attentive as you can during your work day and ask God to help you notice things you wouldn't normally notice. Pray that God would open your eyes to see the world as God does. And then finally, after you do this, after, 1 day, 2 days, 3 days, take notes or keep a journal of your experience. Reflect on the place of prayer in your work. How did you experience work differently because of prayer? What were the outcomes of paying attention to God in your work? So before I close this session out, I want to ask if there are any questions, any comments that you have that I can maybe answer real quick or do my best to answer real quick. I'll give it like 30 seconds to a minute. If you have any questions, feel free to type them out. I'd love to hear them. As always, you can message me directly on Facebook and ask me questions there too. And I will do my best to get back to you as quick as I can. But yeah, if you guys have any questions, feel free to post them in the comments section. But if there aren't any, that's fine too. And we'll close out our time. All right. Well, I hope that this is a growing experience for you. I hope it's stretching. I hope that it doesn't leave you in a place of complacency. And I hope it's a way for you to see work as good, but also to recognize where work can be used to take advantage of others, and maybe where you might have to pray through where do I stand in the gap for those who are being taken advantage of. And so as you do this, I pray that God would open your eyes to see things you haven't seen before, and to work as God is there with you in every moment. Blessings to you all. We love you all. We miss you all. We can't wait to be back together. Next week, Mary Kate will be with us, which is super exciting. So make sure to tune in with her on here. If you have any questions about the book or anything that you would like to ask the author, I know that's kind of a rare opportunity, but you have it. So feel free to bring any questions with you. You can type them out in the comments section. We'll get to them next week with Mary Kate. We'll see you all next week.